Imagine tracking the price of like a standard loaf of bread in a freezing, totally isolated village in the Canadian Arctic. You check the price tag one morning and it just spiked.
Right.
Now, what if you found out that price went up because European tourists changed their vacation flights down in the Caribbean, and simultaneously there's a geopolitical conflict flaring up in Iran?
It sounds completely disconnected, I know.
Yeah, exactly. If you're listening to this and wondering why you should care about a corporate earnings report for a Canadian grocery chain, just think about the last time you noticed inflation at your local supermarket.
Oh, the sticker shock.
Right. Take that feeling, multiply it by 10, and place it in an environment where the nearest competitor is, a 3-hour flight away on a twin-engine prop plane.
Which is just a totally different reality.
It really is. Today, we have a stack of sources detailing the Q4 2026 earnings for the Northwest Company, or NWC. And our mission for this deep dive is to show you how a retailer pulling in $675.5 million in fourth quarter revenue isn't just offering us a dry spreadsheet.
No, definitely not.
They're giving us this high-definition, real-time X-ray into the economics of the world's most remote communities.
I mean, it's basically a geopolitical and climatic thriller hiding inside a financial document.
Honestly, yes.
Because for context, NWC operates in underserved, highly rural areas of northern Canada, Alaska, the South Pacific, and the Caribbean. They reported $39.5 million in net earnings this quarter. But to understand how they arrived at that number, you really have to look at the mechanics of extreme isolation. We're looking at a business where global events instantly rewrite local reality.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why Northwest Company's Canadian net earnings actually fell 7.7% this quarter compared to the same time last year, we first have to look at what pumps the blood through these isolated microeconomies.
Right, the lifeblood.
Management casually calls it money in market, which is, well, it's a term that obscures a massive vital mechanism.
Yeah, money in market is corporate shorthand for government funding, subsidies, and, social safety nets.
Got it.
In the fourth quarter, NWC's Canadian operations hit a wall, with same-store sales dropping 2.8%.
Which is a big hit.
Huge. And this was almost entirely driven by the sudden disappearance of very specific policy programs. So we saw the elimination of the Inuit Child First Initiative food voucher program.
Ah, okay.
And at the exact same time, there was a sharp reduction in funding for Jordan's principal programs.
Let's actually pause here and explain what those are, just so we're all on the same page, because they aren't just line items.
Yeah.
Jordan's principle, for those who might not know the Canadian legal context, is a legal rule. It's designed to ensure First Nations children get equitable access to government-funded health, social, and educational services without getting caught up in bureaucratic disputes over who actually pays for it.
Right, exactly.
And the Inuit Child First Initiative basically operates on a very similar premise, but for Inuit children. We're just reporting what the sources outline here, not taking any political stance on the policies themselves, but that's the mechanical function of these programs.
And mechanically, when those funding streams are active, capital flows directly into these remote communities. It's often distributed as vouchers for essentials.
Makes sense.
But in Q4, that funding saw a drastic reduction, and that happened alongside a drop in drinking water settlement payments compared to the prior year.
Oh, wow. So it's like a sudden drought in an oasis?
That's a perfect analogy. The impact of a government policy shifting down south in a capital city hits the northern retail ecosystem with the speed of a shockwave.
But wait, hold on. If you're running a massive retail operation spanning half a continent, and your baseline revenue relies that heavily on the absolute whims of government bureaucracy and voucher programs, I mean, how do you even forecast a quarter?
It's tough.
Isn't that an incredibly fragile foundation to build a multi-million-dollar logistics network on?
Well, what's fascinating here is that it sounds fragile if you're comparing it to like a typical suburban supermarket. Right. One that relies on a middle-class consumer base with predictable bi-weekly paychecks.
Yeah, sure.
But NWC isn't relying on government whims by choice. They are simply absorbing and reflecting the structural macroeconomic reality of marginalized, highly isolated regions.
Ah, so they mirror the market.
Exactly. In these communities, government support isn't just a bonus. It's a foundational pillar of the local economy. When a voucher program ends abruptly, the consumer's basket changes instantly.
How so?
Well, they stop buying general merchandise. Clothing, electronics, home goods, all that drops off. And every single available dollar collapses back into basic survival-level food necessities.
That makes total sense. So they're effectively a mirror of government policy.
Yep.
And that brings us to how they're managing the other side of this bureaucratic pendulum. Because, okay, while those old funding streams dried up in Q4, causing that dip in sales, NWC is currently bracing for a massive influx of new capital.
Right.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They are actively tracking the upcoming First Nations child and care settlement payments.
And they are tracking them with astonishing precision. We're talking about compensation for individuals in the removed child class.
Yeah,
People who were harmed by the on-reserve child welfare system.
got it.
Management noted a modest uptick in these payments during Q4, but they emphasized it's just a trickle right now.
Hmm.
Out of 63 specific NWC stores designated as being in communities receiving these settlements, only about half have seen a single check clear the local bank.
I mean, just think about the pure logistics of that. They have a map with 63 specific stores pinned on it.
Yeah.
They're essentially monitoring the mail planes, waiting for government bureaucracy to process the payouts.
Literally tracking the checks.
But here's the part that seems counterintuitive to me. Our sources show NWC has intentionally kept their inventory levels completely flat year over year.
Yes, they have.
If you know millions of dollars in settlement checks are about to flood your specific markets, why not flood the stores with inventory right now? Like, why keep levels flat and risk running out when the cash actually drops?
It's a great question. It comes down to the mechanics of cash flow and the physical limitations of remote warehousing.
Okay.
The mechanics of these specific settlement payments dictate that individuals only receive the payout when they reach the age of majority.
Oh, I see.
Right. So instead of one massive single-day stimulus check dropping on a community like a holiday rush, you have a rolling demographic.
Got it.
You have individuals turning 18 this month and then next month, and consistently over the next several years, each receiving a substantial check.
That's wild. You aren't stocking up for a single Black Friday. You are stocking for a multi-year wave of birthdays.
Exactly. And in a remote tundra community, warehouse space is incredibly expensive to heat and maintain.
I bet.
You cannot afford to tie up millions of dollars in working capital by flying in hundreds of heavy motorized ATVs and snowmobiles, only to have them sit in a freezing storage unit for 8 months waiting for a customer's 18th birthday.
Yeah, that would be terrible for business.
So they meticulously stage these big-ticket items alongside bulk food further south. They hold them in larger, cheaper distribution centers, just waiting for the exact moment the local spending power unlocks.
It's so precise. And the sources note this reform is actually expanding, right? There's a recent Human Rights Tribunal approval for an Ontario carve-out regarding these child and family services reforms.
Yes, exactly.
So this long-term structural demographic shift in spending power is only getting wider. And NWC is basically sitting with their finger on the trigger, waiting to move the freight.
That's a great way to put it. Now, while the Canadian operations are locked in this high-stakes bureaucratic waiting game, the international side of their business is battling an entirely different set of global forces.
Okay, let's pivot to that.
The international operations were the undeniable bright spot in this report. Sales were up 5.4%, same-store sales jumped 5.6%, and operating profit was up 9%.
Okay, let's connect that back to the hook from the very beginning about the European tourists. A huge driver of that international success was a booming Caribbean tourist season for their stores, like Cost You Less and Right Way food markets.
Yep.
And a significant reason for that boom was an infrastructural shutdown in Cuba.
Talk about global ripple effects.
Right. You have flights full of Canadian and European tourists looking for sun, finding out they can't go to Cuba, and immediately redirecting to other Caribbean islands where NWC happens to hold major market share.
Just massive luck on timing.
Throw in their expansion in Alaska, including opening a brand new store in Utqiagvik, and you have a very healthy quarter.
But the contrast in how they achieve that is staggering. I mean, they are capitalizing on sun-seeking tourists buying premium groceries in the Caribbean, while simultaneously their own internal airline up north, North Star Air, took an absolute beating trying to deliver basic survival goods.
Yeah, the numbers on the airline are rough. Overall gross profit contracted nearly 0.75%, and the airline was the primary culprit. I mean, the CEO even joked on the earnings call about trying to outsmart the maintenance ferry, which is a very polite way of saying their aircraft maintenance costs skyrocketed in Q4.
And the maintenance costs were just the tip of the iceberg. They faced unprecedented, historically severe snow accumulations.
Oh.
To understand the mechanism here, you have to look at how fresh food travels. You cannot load fresh milk and produce onto a slow-moving winter ice road. It has to fly.
Right, because of shelf life.
Exactly. And when some of these northern markets see more snow in a few weeks than they have in the previous 3 years combined, those small airstrips shut down. The planes literally cannot land.
And when a plane carrying fresh milk sits on a tarmac hundreds of miles away, waiting for a blizzard to clear, the clock is ticking on that food's lifespan.
That's exactly what the earnings report means when it cites a spike in inventory shrink.
Oh, I always assume shrink means theft.
Most people do.
Yeah.
But here, it isn't shoplifting. It is literally fresh food rotting in transit. By the time the runway is plowed and the plane finally lands, the produce has like days or maybe hours of shelf life left.
That's devastating.
The store is immediately forced to mark it down to sell it before it completely spoils, which vaporizes the profit margin on that shipment.
It's a profound duality, profiting off a redirected tropical vacation on one side of the ledger and battling a localized ice age to deliver flour and milk on the other.
It really is.
But weather isn't the only thing grounding those flights or driving up costs, is it? Because this brings us back to the geopolitical tension we mentioned earlier.
Right. Everything in the north runs on fuel. There is no electrical freight train infrastructure up there. The ongoing conflict in Iran is creating volatility in global oil prices, which directly impacts the cost of jet fuel for North Star Air and diesel for the trucks navigating those winter ice roads. And management was extremely clear on the earnings call. They will strategically pass these fuel surcharges on to their customers.
Okay, let me challenge the fundamental economics of that strategy for a second.
Go for it.
We just spent the first 10 minutes of this deep dive establishing that these consumers are reeling from the loss of government food vouchers. They are highly constrained, they're waiting on delayed settlement checks, and pivoting their spending just to buy basic necessities.
Yeah, that's true.
If NWC hikes the price of a jug of milk to cover a soaring jet fuel surcharge, don't they just crush the local demand entirely? Like, how much blood can you squeeze from a stone before the consumer just stops buying?
This raises an important question, and the CEO actually addressed this specific tension, calling it the compound factor in the north. If you're shopping at a supermarket in a major southern city, a global fuel surcharge might add, a few pennies to the cost of an apple, because that apple arrived on a highly efficient freight train carrying thousands of tons of goods. The fuel cost is super diluted.
Right, economy of scale.
Exactly. But in the north, absolutely every single ounce of product flies in on a small plane or drives over a temporary winter ice road. The fuel cost is baked into the DNA of the product in a vastly magnified way.
Wow.
They pass the cost on because the margins are already so incredibly thin that absorbing a jet fuel spike will put the flights themselves in jeopardy.
So the consumer takes the hit because there is simply no margin left to cushion it.
In Canada, yes. But here is the bizarre paradox of their geographical footprint.
Oh.
High oil prices devastate the consumer in northern Canada, right?
Yeah.
But NWC also has deep market penetration in Alaska, and Alaska's economy is structurally tied to the oil industry.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. When global conflict...
Our sources indicate this internal overhaul is currently about 50 to 60% complete, and they're aiming for full maturity by 2027. They're aggressively expanding their private label brands, installing new store-based inventory forecasting technology, and launching an entirely new warehouse management system.
Which is massive. Because overhauling a supply chain in the Arctic is less like replacing an engine mid-flight and more like trying to perform open-heart surgery while the patient is running a marathon in a blizzard.
That paints quite a picture.
You have to keep the blood flowing, the daily critical deliveries of food, while completely rewiring the warehouse arteries that pump it. They took a $1.3 million hit in one-time execution costs this quarter just to install these systems.
Wow.
Yet despite that, Next 100 still managed to drive a 1.3% increase in adjusted operating profit.
Okay, walk us through how that actually works. How does buying new warehouse software directly translate to increased profit when your external costs are skyrocketing?
It translates through massive gains in store labor productivity. Picture a retail worker in a freezing tundra store. Under the old system, a pallet of mixed goods arrives. The worker spends hours in a cold back room manually sorting through it, figuring out what goes on the shelf, overstocking some items, and understocking others.
Right.
That is wasted labor hours. With the new forecasting technology and warehouse management system, the algorithm predicts exactly what that specific store needs based on historical data and incoming weather patterns.
Oh, wow.
So the distribution center down south packs the pallet perfectly. When it arrives up north, it goes straight from the plane to the shelf. The staff isn't wasting hours managing excess backroom stock, and because the forecasting is accurate, fewer fresh goods sit around waiting to spoil and be marked down.
It makes the entire operation radically leaner,
Extremely lean.
which explains the recent addition of Paul Soubry to their board of directors, a detail highlighted in the earnings report. He's the former CEO of NFI Group, and his recognized expertise is in lean operational practices and hardcore business transformations.
Exactly. Bringing an executive with that specific surgical lean background onto the board right now sends a very clear signal to the market. NWC's leadership knows they cannot dictate global oil markets. They can't force government bureaucracy to issue settlement checks faster, and they certainly cannot control the weather.
Definitely not.
The only mechanism for surviving that external volatility is extreme internal operational efficiency. Expanding their private label brands gives them slightly better margins to play with, and optimizing the warehouse labor hours creates a crucial buffer against those soaring freight costs.
So smart. When you step back and look at the whole picture, it really is a masterclass in reading the vital signs of the global economy. What started as a standard corporate earnings report basically connects the dots between Inuit child welfare legal settlements, the sudden redirect of European tourist flights away from Cuba, the compound effect of Middle Eastern conflicts on jet fuel, and the deployment of predictive algorithm tech to save labor hours in a freezing backroom.
It's all connected.
It is. NWC isn't just selling groceries. They are actively navigating one of the most complex, intertwined webs of macro and micro forces on the planet.
They absolutely are. But as we synthesize all these sources, there is a profound structural challenge looming over everything we've discussed today.
Let's hear it.
We talked about how a few weeks of severe historical snow disrupted an entire quarter's profit margin for their internal airline due to spoilage. But as climate change continues to alter the fundamental environment of the North, the duration and viability of the winter ice roads are shrinking.
Oh man, those ice roads, the literal frozen lakes and rivers, are the physical lifelines they rely on to truck in the massive, bulky, heavy goods that are simply too expensive to fly.
Exactly. So what happens when the very geography of the North shifts permanently? If the ice roads freeze weeks later in the season and melt weeks earlier, the reliance on high-cost, volatile air freight will skyrocket exponentially.
That's a terrifying thought for supply chains.
Will the sheer financial cost of isolation eventually become too high for these marginalized microeconomies to bear? Or will the kind of technological forecasting and lean operational excellence we see in their Next 100 program somehow engineer a new, sustainable way forward in a melting landscape?
That is something to really think about.
It is the ultimate question that will
Yeah.
dictate the future of retail at the edges of the earth.